Please come into order. Oh, there's still people checking in. We'll give them a couple minutes to check in. Good evening. Tonight, joining us in leading us on the Star Spangled Banner is Jane Howard. Please rise. Thank you, Mrs. Howard. On your chairs tonight, you're going to find a brochure from ACMi that has the playback schedule for the town meeting, and the only difference is on the brochure. It was printed before Comcast changed their government channel, so the new Comcast government channel is 22, so if you're watching on Comcast, you know you're on 22, but take a look at that, and that's sort of the ACMi's promo for putting us on Arlington Cable. I don't have any other remarks. Just keep your cell phones turned off or on vibrate if you would. If you're going to take a call, take it outside. Are there any town meeting members who have yet to be sworn in? New town meeting members who weren't here Monday? You got to take the new pledge. I pledge to attend all scheduled town meetings, to participate fully and evaluate fairly all matters before town meeting, and vote in the best interest of the town with respect thereto. I support free and open speech and will treat others with mutual respect. Say it? Okay. In spite of conflicting opinions. And I pledge to conduct myself in a civil manner that is becoming of an elected town meeting member. I do solemnly swear that I will faithfully and impartially perform the duties incumbent upon me as a town meeting member to the town of Arlington, in accordance with the bylaws, Town Manager Act, and laws of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, so help me God. Thank you. I actually got a couple questions about the oath this evening, whether it was a joke or not. It's not. The Town Government Reorganization Committee thought long and hard about this. We did rewrite it in the hopes of fostering a more civil town meeting with less personal discourse. Yes, Mr. Gallagher. Name and precinct.
Charlie Gallagher, Precinct 18. I simply can't help wonder that many folks who were not re-elected in the last election did not take that oath. And I personally feel that if we're going to be given a new oath to take, we should see it in its entirety before we begin down a path of swearing to something when we don't even know what we're going to be swearing to. What if you had said at the very end, under penalty of death? In other words, I really truly believe that you should rescind that oath that everyone has taken at this point, have it printed out, give us a chance to look at it, and choose to swear to it or not. The other oath, I have no problem with.
Okay, well, I will have it printed out, but I don't know about rescinding it. I don't want to have a debate about it.
One oath.
Oh, no,
Other
no,
folks are under two oaths.
everybody was re-elected except for 810 and another precinct. So if they would rise, we'll swear them in.
Don't do it.
I mean, next time. I mean, we're going to get pedantic about it, but we're all going to pledge to be civil, respect other people's opinions, and act in a civil manner, basically. So, you know, it's common courtesy and professionalism one expects of your fellow town meeting members. I recognize the Chairman of the Board of Selectmen, Mr. Greeley.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Kevin Greeley, Chairman of the Board of Selectmen. It is moved that just in case all of the business of the meeting as set forth in the warrant for the annual town meeting is not disposed of at this session, when the meeting adjourns, it adjourns to Monday, April 30th, 2012 at 8 p.m.
All in favor? Opposed? So carried. Any announcements or resolutions? Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Just, if I may, three quick personal things. I was asked a number of questions after the state of the town the other evening. The most frequent one was, why the cane? And it's for defense, of course, in case I need it at any point. I had back surgery just about 3.5 weeks ago. I had pinched nerves, they were unpinched, and I should get better. So, but thank you for your concern, but I think I explained that 50 times the other night, so I just didn't want to have to do it the other 200. The other question I was asked on the break is, Mr. Greeley, how does it work that we have a mayor and a board of selectmen? Was she elected from the selectmen to become the mayor? While she certainly would be, of all past and present selectmen here would attest, we say that lovingly. Maria is so vital. She's technically the administrator to the Board of Selectmen. The final issue, and again, your indulgence, Mr. Moderator, is one of our, you know, the other night I spoke about my brother's quote about great lives with great hearts. an individual who's been with us at least 30 years in this town meeting, permanent town building committees, and so many other ways, is struggling with stomach cancer. He's made a huge impact on this community. Whatever your belief, whatever your lucky talismans, if you believe in a God or whatever, please take 20 seconds of silence and send some love, some hope, some prayer to Bill Shea and his family. May God bless him. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
You're welcome, sir. Pair of glasses was found. If they're yours, come on up and get them. Can't tell if they're men's or women's. They're nice little glasses. Up, here we go. Precincts 1 through 7 were supposed to have met and organized prior to the meeting tonight. If you didn't do it, please do it at the break. Any other announcements or resolutions? Mr. O'Connor. Okay, get you next.
James O'Connor, Precinct 19, and your assistant moderator. In the consideration of brevity, I didn't say anything the other night, but I accept wholeheartedly your vote of confidence and was sworn in Tuesday, so I'm able to serve if anything were to happen to John. So thank you.
Mr. Tosti.
When we left on Monday night, there were 2 boxes with a substantial number of Finance Committee reports in the back of the hall. They have disappeared, and we have checked all over. So hopefully everybody has a Finance Committee report. I've been told a few people might have taken 1 or 2 or 3. If so, could you please bring them back? If you don't have one, I guess you'd have to download them off the website, but hopefully everybody has one. Thank you.
What color was your report? Green? It's green. It's a green report. Any other announcements or resolutions? Oh, Mr. Paluso, then Mr. Klein.
I'm Ted Paluso from Precinct 6. The new oath of office, for your information, was drafted by me based upon an oath of office that was presented to the Congress of the United States. Only 2 congressmen agreed to sign it. 2. I kind of felt that we're better than those guys.
Mr. Klein? Did you have your hand up for announcement or resolution? Yeah.
Good evening, Stuart Clem, Precinct 1. When we came to town meeting on Monday night, once again, we had pins. We don't normally have pins unless we have the generosity of Mr. Josh Lobel, who took the time and effort to make the pins. So I think we owe a debt of gratitude to Josh. Thank you very much.
Any other announcements or resolutions? Mr. Greeley.
Sorry, I know you're sick of me. I wonder, would Mr. Lobel yield to a question? I have been asked what the difference is that some badges have white stars and some have red. Is there any significance, sir? Before you answer, mine are white, and make sure there's something important there, if you will.
That's a very good question. Well, on the bottom of the pin, it has some additional writing that you may notice. And if you happen to have red stars, then it says you've had more than 25 years of service in town meeting, or 2 people who've had more than 50 years, Harry and Elsie. So anyway, that's just to recognize that term, which is, I think, quite impressive.
Any reports of committees? Any committees have reports to present? see the Capital Planning Committee report. You going to wait on that? Okay. Mr. Tosti? No, we didn't take it off because no one had a report. Okay. We're going to go right into Article 9 because the lady who's presenting took the night off to be here, so we're going to start with 9 so we can get her done so she doesn't have to miss another night if we don't get to it tonight. So Article 9 is before us. Yeah? We never put it on the table. Oh, 9. Oh, okay. All in favor of taking 9 off the table, please say yes. Yes. Opposed? 9 is before us. Okay, hold, they're already starting. Who's that had her hand up? Yeah, I got you, Paul.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Mike Kerr, member of the Arlington Redevelopment Board. And actually, the reason that we're doing it as well is because we have several of the commissioners here to answer questions after the presentation. That's why we wanted to make sure that we got through the whole thing. The zoning bylaw change sought in Article 9 creates a new use under the table of uses that would allow, by special permit, the placement of cremated remains in parcels controlled by the Conservation Commission in the Open Space District. As most of you know, there is a pressing need to secure alternatives to Mount Pleasant Cemetery, which is very near its capacity. Many different folks in town have been working on this problem for more than a decade, with a special emphasis during the past 5 years. This hard work has resulted in certain adjustments to the cemetery itself, which has helped extend its capacity. However, the tweaks have just about run their course, and something more substantive and creative must be done soon if we wish to allow for any cemetery use to be available to residents in Arlington in the very near future. As most of you all also know, there was a very similar article proposed last year. That article was recommended by the Redevelopment Board and voted down by town meeting. We are back again this year because this is a real problem for the town that we believe needs to be addressed, and we believe we learned a lot from last year. Town meeting members rightfully wanted more information to be provided in order to answer their concerns, and this year we aim to do just that. We appreciate the members taking the time and effort to look at this again, and we look forward to providing you with the information that you need to make an informed decision. First, I would like to address the article itself. Then I would like to address a specific proposal that we expect to be put forward if the zoning bylaw is amended. As I mentioned, Article 9 relates to a zoning change to parcels controlled by the Conservation Commission in the Open Space District. In reviewing the need for the bylaw change, we first considered the current cemetery use under zoning bylaw. Currently, cemetery use in all its forms is allowed only in R0 and R1 single-family zoning districts. Any cemetery use in these districts requires only a special permit from the ZBA, as it is not subject to environmental design review by the Redevelopment Board. Given Arlington's use-based zoning, then, in order to allow any cemetery use in a district other than R0 or R1, either the parcel must be rezoned R0 or R1, or the zoning bylaw must be changed, which is why we are here tonight. Next, the board considered open space. All members of the Redevelopment Board are keenly aware of what a precious resource Arlington's open space is, and even more so, its conservation land. This first slide, let me go to it. Oh. Yeah. Maybe? Oh, now I did it. Okay. This first slide is what many, including myself, consider to be open space in town. The yellow is parks and recreation parcels, the green is Conservation Commission parcels, the orange represents other protected open space parcels under Chapter 97, and the white is the schools. This second slide is the subset that is Conservation Commission controlled parcels that lie in the OS district, which is what this zoning bylaw amendment addresses. As you can see from the slide, there are very few, but very important areas in the OS district that come under the jurisdiction of the Conservation Commission. And the Conservation Commission rightly protects those parcels vigorously. After holding our hearing and deliberating, the board considered that, given our limited conservation land resource, Only a very limited form of cemetery use should be allowed in open space, and that meaningful additional checks and balances should be required in the event open space is ever considered for this use. Therefore, the vote before you is limited solely to cremated remains, and there can be no associated structures, only low landscaped wall, curbs, and stones. In addition, the vote before you requires a special permit from the redevelopment board after a full environmental design review with all the standards that must be met, including the relation of the use to the neighborhood. Importantly, this use would also require the approvals of the Cemetery Commission, the Conservation Commission, and, if applicable, the Historical Commission, which means that there will be at least 3 public hearings, possibly 4, and several different areas of expertise weighing in on any proposed placement of cremated remains in Conservation Commission-controlled open space. Given these safeguards, and especially given the ability for any neighbors and the public in general to be heard in multiple venues at multiple hearings, the Redevelopment Board unanimously approved the vote. Moving now from the general to the specific. If this zoning bylaw amendment is passed by town meeting, we would expect a proposal to come forward relating to Cook's Hollow. By way of background, it's not happening there. In 2006, the Cemetery Expansion Committee was created to help solve the pressing need to find space for the near-capacity Mount Pleasant Cemetery. For several years thereafter, the committee held informational meetings and public hearings as it tried to come up with ways to meet this need, oftentimes with out-of-the-box thinking, such as approaching Boosa Farm for any interest in selling. In the end, Cook's Hollow was believed to be the most attractive and viable way to meet at least part of this future need, so it was endorsed by the Cemetery Expansion Committee as the most important next step for providing some relief to the space problems at Mount Pleasant. Understanding the pressing need, a very unique collaboration was then struck between the Conservation Commission, the Cemetery Commission, and the Historic Commission, as well as the Manager's Office, the Department of Public Works, and the Department of Planning and Community Development to work on a feasibility study for Cook's Hollow. Before spending my last couple of minutes on the feasibility design itself, I would like to point out that, while this collaboration is certainly important from a design and review perspective, it is also important from a fiscal perspective. As Conservation Commission land, and yes, it does remain Conservation Commission land, and with the involvement of the Historical Commission, it is expected that the project will have a very good chance of successfully seeking conservation grants, waterway grants, and historic grants. It is believed to be especially attractive to grant providers because of the multi-commission collaboration. The Cemetery Commission does have some capital to help seed the project, but the real benefit of its involvement comes from Cemetery Commission's perpetual fund, which would be used for the upkeep of a redesigned Cook's Hollow in the future. In the event this was just a cemetery parcel, no grants would be available, and although the seed capital would help, it is expected that capital budget would be required to get any pure cemetery expansion off the ground. Now back to Cook's Hollow and the feasibility study. Through all parties' collaboration, a feasibility study was created around using landscape elements for cremated remains in Cook's Hollow as one element of a larger project to restore and beautify the area and keep it as a Conservation Commission parcel. In addition, as part of this collaboration, the Historical Commission is expected to add historical elements to Cook's Hollow in order to point out the fact that it was the site of the first mill in Arlington, built in 1637 by Captain George Cook, something new that I learned. Looking at a few pictures from 2009 and then from today, you can first see that I'm not as good a photographer as the 2009 one, but you can also see even further issues with the park. It is a nice little park, but it only gets more and more tired and in disrepair. I'm going to walk through these really quickly. If you look at this, actually, if you could go back for 1 second, if you look at the new picture, you're going to find that today the sign, the bench, and the 2 waste cans are now gone. And then if you could go to the next one, this is from 2009 again. That light post is broken, and 2 of the trees in the background are gone. And if you could go to the next one, please. And here those 2 trees are right there. Now, if you go to today's pictures, beautiful work. You can see the light post is broken, the tree is down. You can see the damage to the bridge over there. It's in tired shape. If you go one more, you'll see a little bit more. Next is a map that shows Cook's Hollow Park in relation to its surroundings. You can see that Mount Pleasant Cemetery is right across Mystic Street. This is key because any memorial services for residents being placed in Cook's Hollow would need to take place at the chapel in Mount Pleasant, and if something was planned after the memorial service in the park, then relatives and friends would park in the cemetery and walk across Mystic Street. It is possible that a pedestrian signal may be sought for that crossing. Finally, we have a few of the designs that were created around the feasibility study. They're out back there. We also have some slides, but we're not going to have time to get to them right now. Please remember that this was only a feasibility study. If you pass this zoning bylaw amendment, a more complete plan would need to be created, and then that plan would be required to go through the process of each of the Redevelopment Board, the Conservation Commission, the Historical Commission, and the Cemetery Commission, with the public hearings and other requirements of each. In closing, we believe that the vote relating to Article 9 is a prudent approach to help solve part of the capacity issue at Mount Pleasant. We believe that the limitations and safeguards that have been put in place will provide neighbors and other interested parties with the protections and voice that they need, want, and they should have in this type of project. Finally, we believe that this change is the first step in supporting a collaborative and creative way for town government to address a pressing issue. As I mentioned before, Mr. Moderator, we do have here tonight with us Michelle Hassler from the Cemetery Commission, Joanne Robinson of the Historical Commission, and David White of the Conservation Commission available this evening to answer questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
How's that for
Mr. Schlickman?
Paul Schlickman, Precinct 9. I'm a resident of 47 Mystic Street, which is on the block of this project. I'm chair of the delegation for Precinct 9. I've been a town meeting member since 1993. In my experience in town meeting, ladies and gentlemen, anytime there has been any sort of substantive change in the use of town-owned property, the voters of this town has been warned through the warrant specifically of the property to be affected and the change that would take place. The warning in this warrant for this parcel, Article 9, take out your warrant, read the language, see what the voters of the town of Arlington read when they received their warrant in the mail prior to the election. To see if the town will vote to amend Section 5.04, Table of Use Restrictions, the zoning bylaw, nobody who received this warrant was warned that if town meeting makes this vote, this is the last vote that would come before this meeting before Cooks Hollow Park is turned into Cooks Hollow Memorial Park. It is a backdoor using the zoning bylaw to circumvent our authority as town meeting over town land to designate the purpose of the land that is owned by the town and we oversee. What is more significant is that this is a back door so that the next time somebody's looking for additional space to inter remains, they have a shopping list which the previous speaker flashed on the wall, Mount Gilboa, windows on Mystic Lake, Ridge Street, Brattle Street, and Hemlock Street, all in the open space district, all subject to what would happen here, a review by the Conservation Commission, the Cemetery Commission, the Redevelopment Board. Done deal. No offense to Mr. Dunn, he has nothing to do with it. And their bulldozers for the cemetery use will be there before the neighbors really know about it. Because let me tell you something. As a town meeting member from Precinct 9 since I moved into this precinct in 2002, I have never been invited to a meeting on this. I have never been noticed about this parcel. If there is community support for it, it is thin and carefully cultivated among a small number of people. Most neighbors don't know what happened. It's not in the warrant. It's thinly disguised. It is a back door. This is deja vu all over again, ladies and gentlemen. We voted this down last time for the same reason. You would think that if the proponents really were interested in doing this the right way, they would have heard the objections that were raised in this meeting last time about using the zoning bylaw to repurpose property. It is wrong. It is undemocratic. It is not what we should be doing. We should be maintaining our rights as a meeting to determine the use of town property, just as every other vote to transfer jurisdiction has come through this body, to move it from the selectmen to the redevelopment board to the school department or between various agencies. This should be...
Wait, you can't just break in the middle, and no one should give that microphone to anybody until I say to give it to them. You're on the list, Ms. Scott. You'll get your... then you'll have to...
As to what Mr. Schlickman is saying.
He's saying that he believes it's an unfair warning to the town. If you want to bring that up, that's a point of debate. That's not a point of information. Please give the microphone back, Mr. Schlickman. I didn't dock your time for that.
Thank you. If this is to happen, what should happen is we should put a warrant article in the warrant saying that we are going to transfer a property from the Conservation Commission to the Cemetery Commission, warn the voters of the town, make it a public debate, let everybody know what's happening, and so it would happen. And to protect the people from Mount Gilboa. Make sure that if that's to become a cemetery next, that it's a warrant article specific to the property requiring a transfer of the land from the Conservation Commission to the Cemetery Commission. Ladies and gentlemen, when we created open space zoning, when we placed parcels into open space zoning, we never thought we were putting them into a land use that would include a cemetery. When we voted to put land into the jurisdiction of the Conservation Commission, I know we had ideas of what the Conservation Commission is and the purpose of that body is, and nobody in this room, I guarantee, thought, hey, let's put it in the hands of the Conservation Commission so it become a cemetery. In this meeting, if we want land to be a cemetery, we should put it into the jurisdiction of the Cemetery Commission. And the precedent that was cited on the list, well, we designated authority to the Parks Commission on dog parks. Well, you know what? It was very limited, and we can take that back anytime we want. If a cemetery is installed, it's irreversible. You can't take conservation land back from cemetery use. Yes, there's a problem with burial space in this town. Yes, it's a pretty design. Yes, it's been a neglected park. Turning conservation land into a cemetery without appropriate warning and without the transfer of jurisdiction to the Cemetery Commission is wrong. It's not transparent. It's anti-democratic. It does not give the residents of the town enough time to see what's happening and put their elected officials in front of the decision. If you want to take away your right to determine the use of town property, go ahead and vote for this. If you want to preserve your rights in the town form of government to make decisions about the land that the town owns, that the voters have elected you to take care of, then you must vote this down. And I hope if they bring it back again next year, they'll do it in a manner that properly notices the voters and transfers jurisdiction to the Cemetery Commission. That's the only fair, right, accountable, transparent way to do this. Say no to this backdoor deal. Please vote no on Article 9.
Ms. Rowe?
I'm Clarissa Rowe. I am also the chair of my precinct, Precinct 4, and I'm very proud of it. Before I start, I would just like to say one thing. There have been, I believe, 3 public hearings on this in the last 5 years. The last one was held a couple of weeks ago, and despite what Paul says, I actually sent him an email reminding him of the hearing because of his concerns last year. It was too bad that he didn't turn up for it, because it would have been helpful for the redevelopment board to hear his comments. The problem, this is not a backdoor issue. This is an issue of our future, and the future for people who have lived here either 2 years or their lifetimes. When you're planning your life, one of the things you do is you plan for the end of your life. And if this community means something to you, as it does to most of us in this room, you want to plan for where you're going to be buried, whether it's a green burial or a cremained burial or a full body burial. Each religion has different traditions. The one thing that the Cemetery Commission is trying to do, and the reason it keeps coming back to you, is there's a problem that we have to address in the next 5 years or sooner. They are being very creative. They are thinking about every single space in the cemetery, Mount Pleasant Cemetery. They're going to be putting in cremain spaces there. They're fixing up the chapel. There may be cremain spaces there once the chapel is worked on. They're looking at green burials. They're looking at every possibility. And as Mike said about the Cemetery Expansion Commission, which as a selectman I was sitting on, we went beyond the borders of Arlington. We did go to Lexington. We did go to Bedford to try to find alternatives. We liked this idea. We thought it was a creative idea to involve all 3 commissions. This was not something that was done in a vacuum. We had 2 meetings. We did send out notices within 100 feet of the cemetery, and unfortunately that wasn't where Paul's apartment is. But that doesn't mean that it's a bad thing. This is not a lack of transparency. This has been in front of you twice. It will have to be in front of you until, in some form, until we come together and solve a problem. The problem is that we need to do something that is solves the problem for our elderly people, or the young woman that was buried last week who is a Hindi. And I'm very proud of my town that we accommodate all kinds of religions. And I think that one of the things that we have here is a way of trying to get the 3 commissions to work together. This is not Mount Auburn Cemetery. This is Arlington's version of Mount Auburn Cemetery. We have wonderful history here. We were trying to add that history of what the Cook's Mill did to this town, to bring more people to it, to have it a place where people could enjoy it. For the children that are coming from Arlington Catholic to play football, they go through this every day. This is a neglected piece of land. It's a piece of land that we need to think creatively about. I don't agree with Paul in terms of the lack of notice. I've been involved with the issue for 5 years, and I'm certainly not trying to do anything behind anybody's back. If there is a desire of this meeting to have one of the elected boards or even the whole town meeting vote on it, we can come back and do that. There's nothing that says that we can't do it. I'm sure the selectmen will be delighted to review it. This is not what we're talking about. We're talking about a creative use of land. There is no desire to turn every little green space into a cemetery. Arlington is a very dense community. We value our land. We have lots of different kinds of uses. We have dog owners dealing with hours that they can bring their dogs. We have to be balanced. We have to be considerate. We have to think of other people. So I'm asking you to please vote for this. And if, in fact, you want to have an elected board approve it, then say so, and we'll make it happen. Thank you very much.
Thank you. You. Yep. I don't know your name, I'm sorry.
Beth Ann Friedman, Precinct 15. I attended some of the ARB meetings on this issue, and I still would like some clarification, because it was my understanding from the ARB meetings that even though there would be cremains in part of the open space under the Conservation Commission, the Conservation Commission would still be responsible for overseeing the entire area. So can I have some clarification? Is that correct? Or would the Conservation Commission cede certain responsibilities and to the Cemetery Commission?
Mr. Kerr, can you
and
answer that?
Cede some of the land?
Certainly try.
Yeah.
Once again, it was a feasibility study and a conceptual plan. So with that in mind, it would need to go through the hearings and everything else in order to absolutely figure every single thing out. But if you could put up the next slide, maybe would be a little bit helpful in talking about this. I think it's the next one. These are really big files. I think that's why it kind of gets hung up sometimes. But anyway, what you're going to see is that there are some low walls over to the side, which is where the cremains are. And then there's a path going through, there's a whole park and everything else. It would be conservation land. There would be upkeep by both conservation and cemetery, but really it's going to be the Cemetery Commission that's going to take the lead, it's expected, on the upkeep. With respect to rules and the like, you'll see there's still an open path and a big greenway going right through. So it's conservation land, can be used as conservation land. Right now, dogs aren't allowed off leash there. I got to tell you, I don't think they'll be allowed then either. But from the perspective of it being conservation land, it would remain very much the same, just with that, actually, with those walls over to the top right there, and maybe in the back left. That's what the conceptual plan is, and that's the absolute expectation of everybody concerned, is that it would remain conservation land. So, and I think if it were to be transferred over to the Cemetery Commission, that would not be the case. So,
So then, a follow-up question regarding, it was mentioned that memorial services would be held in the cemetery.
correct.
But I can envision that family members or whatever would want to see the cremains actually put in the wall. Now, how would the park be
Closed? No.
reserved, closed, or?
No, absolutely not. It couldn't
So
be.
how
There are no
would that
gates.
work?
There's nothing like that. If you can actually go back one, David, I can just show you that, because that shows how close the parking is to the actual park as you come on over. But no, the park isn't reserved for it. It's simply another use of the park. So anyway, the one that showed the current day picture with the cemetery driveway over here, all the cars would be lined up in that cemetery driveway behind the buildings on Mystic. They would go down that path and across the street. As I said, through the hearings and everything else, I guess my expectation would be is I could understand where there might be a pedestrian crossing there, maybe even a pedestrian light.
And again, since from attending the meetings, I was under the impression that flowers and other memorials would not be permitted, and it would just really be a wall that was natural landscape. Is that is my
I think that's what
understanding
we've talked
correct,
about.
or what you talked about?
I think that's what we've talked about and everything else. Once again, through the process, though we're just talking feasibility and conceptual, but I think that that's the expectation. Yes, and Michelle can probably talk about it. She's the cemetery commissioner as well. Why don't you go up?
Is there an open question still?
Hi, Michelle Hassler from the cemetery, as we all know. If there was
Okay.
concern about flowers, memorials, et cetera, no, that none of that would be allowed. It would just be the walls. Any parking that would have for anybody that wants to go over to go through the park, parking would just be in the cemetery, just like many people do now. There really wouldn't be much of a change with that. Any services would be at the chapel in the cemetery. There would be no services over at the park. Does that answer the questions?
Yes, it does.
Yes.
So, given that the restricted use of the open space, and that from the designs that I've seen, that it would be a very natural landscaping, that unless you really knew there were cremains there, you
Exactly.
probably wouldn't even know that it was, cremains were in the wall, that
Right.
I would, support this as an alternative to way of interment.
Oh, thank you.
So,
Yes.
thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Kaplan? Where'd you go? Yep.
Bill Kaplan, Precinct 6. I voted against the similar article last year. Even if I voted for it, I wouldn't vote for this one because last year we were ceding one park to the Cemetery Commission. This year we're ceding all of them, basically. The choice is going to be taken away from us. I think that's the lesson that the Cemetery Commission learned last year, was that don't let town meeting have a say in it. If they can take us out of the equation, they can do whatever is most expedient. We're here to make those decisions, not to be, driven around. This year, I was going to say on the notifications of public meetings. Mr. Schlickman may have been notified. I wasn't. I don't live there, but if we're turning our entire town into a cemetery eventually, then it'd be nice to know about it. I'm guessing most of you weren't notified. Public hearings, they're public, but they're not particularly well publicized. So unless you're constantly scanning the notices, you're not going to know when the vote to turn the next bit of conservation land into a cemetery is going to be. You're not going to hear about it. It's just going to happen. Arlington is a crowded town. We're densely packed. We're running out of space for everything. Is turning Arlington into a necropolis the solution? Once all the conservation land is taken up, how long will that take? 5 years, 10 years? This is 50 to 150 human remains will fit in Cook's Hollow. How many years of remains is that? I don't know, but at some point that they're going to use up that space. They're going to be looking for the next space. Will we be turning other parts of the town into crematoriums? Or is Town Hall, when we need a new roof on Town Hall, we'll be sticking remains in nooks and crannies of Town Hall as well? Ultimately, whatever we do, we're going to run out of space in Arlington. So whether we run out of space, in the next 5 years or the next 25 years, it's going to happen. We should be planning for that future, not how can we postpone it by a couple of years. That's a Band-Aid. There are open spaces around here, maybe further out than Lexington and Bedford. When they said they thought out of the box, they weren't thinking very far out of the box. My grandparents lived in Brookline, which is also a pretty dense community. They're not buried there. They're buried in Wakefield. When we want to visit them, we take a car and we drive. It's not next door. It's not in Brookline. But, if Brookline was all cemeteries, then there wouldn't be anywhere for the living. Ultimately, these crowded communities like Arlington are going to have to start looking elsewhere. And there's plenty of open space in Massachusetts, just not within 5 minutes of here. That's not a problem. I think ultimately we have to be thinking about, Arlington it should be for the living, not the dead. If we care about the town, we shouldn't be thinking about, I care about the town, so I want to make sure I'm buried here. We should be thinking, I care about the town, I want to make sure that my children and grandchildren have a nice town to live in, too. I guess the other point is just that there was a talk about, the Conservation Commission is still going to sort of run the property, and, dogs will still be allowed, not off-leash, but on-leash. But, I have a dog. On-leash or not, the dogs are going to urinate when they want to urinate. If we're going to let dogs into this park, they're going to be peeing on human remains. And, so we're either going to ban the dogs from the park, or we're not, we're going to have that happen. So to say that dogs are going to be on leash, it's not an issue, is sort of, that's ridiculous. We're going to have to ban dogs from this property at some point. When somebody's going to figure it out that, hey, that dog is urinating right on, Uncle Joe. So anyway, I guess that's my point. I'd say, I'm against the idea that we should be trying to find every nook and cranny in town that we can turn into a storage place for human remains. I think we got to look outside of Arlington, maybe 20 minutes outside of Arlington. That's not the end of the world. Like I said, I managed to visit my grandparents' graves. So we should be looking outside Arlington, not inside of Arlington. And even if we want to allow this particular project, don't take away our right to decide that for the future projects. At the very least, we should be turning this down because it's up to town meeting to decide whether we're going to turn our conservation land into cemeteries. It shouldn't just be up to the Conservation Commission and the Cemetery Commission. So I'm voting against this. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Hayner? Ms. Fiore?
Elsie Fiore, Precinct 2. At the time Cook's Hollow was created, I was a member of the Conservation Commission. Robert Bryant, who's deceased, was the chairman. I would like to read from the 1972 town report. I have them all, just so that you might get a little feeling of the beginning. In 1972, the town meeting authorized the purchase of the 42,000 square 600 square feet on Forest Street near Winchester, which Paul Schlickman referred to. The town meeting authorized funds for the second phase of development of Cook's Hollow. Due to severe rainstorms, some erosion of the banks of the Millbrook has taken place and construction of the park has been delayed until the erosion control measures can be completed. The town engineer and director of properties and natural resources have given valuable assistance in resolving the problem. The completion of Cook's Hollow project is contemplated by the end of 1973 at that time. Cook's Hollow was the first step in the development of the Millbrook Linear Park. We appreciate the efforts of the Garden Club, and they were certainly paramount in getting that done, and other interested citizens in their continued support for this project. As a matter of fact, about 100 people donated money to plant trees and flowers all along the banks. And I asked earlier of somebody on the redevelopment board or one of the boards if any of those people were ever notified that we were going to be doing this. The other part that I want to say is that the Mass Legislature did pass the Wetlands Protection Act of 1972. It requires conservation commissions to hold public hearings on any proposed project that covers removing, filling, dredging, alterations of banks, marsh, meadow, and so forth. Anything subject to flooding without filing a written notice of intention. They couldn't do it without filing a written notice of intention to so remove and so forth. And the Conservation Commission at that time decided that since that act had been passed, that we really ought to hold a hearing, which we did. So the first filing under this act in Arlington was made by the Conservation Commission, covering the erosion control construction of Cook's Hollow. The Conservation Commission, in the 10 years I was on it, and I'm not saying I was responsible for all of that, we spent a lot of time, this book and other books tell what the Conservation Commission has done. I think the main thing is that Millbrook Park was supposed to be the beginning of what was going to be a continued linear park all through Arlington. It never has gotten done or even finished. The Conservation Commission lost other pieces of land through other minor things. I agree with the things that Mr. Schlickman has said. I also didn't want to be standing here without having at least spoken to somebody who was on the commission at the same time that I was. And Dr. Peter Braun, who was a commission member, and he lives down near the Mystic Lake, I called him, and he said that he thinks that this goes against anything that has to do with open space, especially we're assuming, and maybe wrongly, that the cremated remains or the blocks that are holding the cremated remains will have inscriptions, and the ground plaques will have inscriptions. And he said that that goes against what open space is all about. You may understand that I am speaking particularly about Cook's Hollow because it has meant so much to me over the years, still does. I would like to see it restored. I heard somebody mention the Arlington Catholic. I don't mean to demean them, but I will tell you that it was no sooner put into place and finished when I was going by, and the young people who play football or baseball, whatever they were playing at the time, were sitting there changing their cleats, changing their shoes into cleats, and then they would sit there and change them back. They had practically ruined the place in no time at all, just by lack of attention to what was there. I'm opposed to the creation of any kind of cremated crematorium type things. It's not really a crematorium. And I, too, asked the question about where people were going to park, and now they tell us that they're going to park across the street in the cemetery. And there could be, I suppose, other kinds of funerals and things going on, and it just doesn't seem suitable. So I would say one more thing, which is I didn't get real notice of this. I don't know how I heard about it, but I have talked quite a bit since I found out, and it's a few weeks now, to Carol Kowalski, Chairman of Planning. And I told her that one of the unfortunate things for the Conservation Commission in its early days was we had no place to store our records. Every Conservation Commission person had to take their things home. Recently I met a young woman who was one of my best Conservation Commission people through the years. And I asked her, if she had any of her records left. I told her what was going on. And she said that she had disposed of them. And I'm sure other Conservation Commission members did too. I told Carol Kowalski that I would look in my archives, which I call my overstuffed cellar, and I found all the maps and things which I don't think that the town has because we had to take everything home. I have one that outlines, and I told her I would like to meet with her, and last week she was on vacation, so I wasn't able to do that, and I needed to find them. I also, someplace there, recently found the list of the 100 people who gave money, and I think that they should know what's going on. This really needs much more discussion than here in this room, for the very reason that there are open spaces that are very, very tiny. We were given, the town was given, perhaps not at this time, but a little later, all of these little pieces of land that they're talking about. And I don't remember who we sat down with, but it was the land, small pieces of land were divided between the Conservation Commission and another department, I've forgotten which, and the Conservation Commission picked the ones that they wanted. So, but nevertheless, those were all Conservation Commission lands. This is a very, very serious thing. And I happen to be at the, it's not a party, the thing that was held for Brian Greeley. I apologize for missing the name of it, at the elderly housing there. And I looked over the bank, and when you look at the picture that they show, that's a big hill right behind the elderly housing. I don't see how they could do too much with that. The park is not big enough, in my opinion, to make it into a place to have cremated remains. I would like to see it kept as the continuation of the linear park that it was supposed to be. And the town could have bought the houses on Mystic Street across from Cook's Hollow. They were for sale a number of years ago. I suggested at that time to some town officials that it would be a good idea, but that was ignored. I think the other thing we should have done long ago, if possible, is to try to find a place for the automobile repair place that's behind the elderly housing there at the corner of Chestnut Street. I don't know whether anything has been done there, and perhaps the soil is so bad it's not possible. But it seems to me there are still things and places that can be looked at, and I'm surprised that there hasn't been more discussion of this among the general public. I'm opposed not to looking for places for cremated remains, but I'm certainly opposed to it in Cook's Hollow. Cook's Hollow was meant to be a place for us to sit down and rest, going from one say, Mass Avenue over to the other streets, and it's not going to be that, because I doubt very much if people are going to be walking around in a place where cremated remains are interred, not for any other reason except
1 minute,
it's not
Elsie.
attractive. Thank you very much.
Mr. Bayer?
Paul Bayer, Precinct 13. For the Cemetery Commission to do any kind of, create any kind of cremation area in any of these parks would require money. I have a question as to how much control this town meeting has over their spending of their money. It certainly must be true that if they need money appropriated by the town to do the work, we will have to approve it. If they have grant money or other money that's put away from previous years, can they just spend it without our town meeting approval?
Is someone from the Cemetery Commission can answer that question? Otherwise, Mr. Tosti, maybe.
Hi, Michelle Assler. We do have money in our accounts that we are able to use, but this project would also be eligible for many grants, which is what makes it so attractive, between conservation, between historical, between the waterways. That's something that we're really hoping for. We have some seed money that we can use. The cemetery also has certain trust funds that have certain provisions on them that we can also use if we needed to. But we were going to use the part of our money that we're allowed to use. We put in a request for that. Yep.
Thank you. So my conclusion then is it sounds like they can spend the money to do this work without coming back to us.
Mr. Loretti?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Chris Loretti, Precinct 7. I think it's worth town meeting considering how this article is the same as what it was last year and how things have changed over the past year. And my sense was that the article didn't pass last year because it was too broad and potentially involved the conversion of a lot of other properties in town, or the use of those properties under the jurisdiction of the Conservation Commission in the Open Space District for the same purpose. I think it's also important to understand that the Open Space Zoning District is a relatively young district within the town of Arlington. It was created because formerly a lot of the land in the town that was supposed to be conservation land was in zoning districts that allowed development and allowed different uses. And so what we're seeing here is sort of a reversal of that process, and I'm really not sure why this article didn't come back and specifically focus on Cook's Hollow if that was the intent. Now, I suppose you could argue that the ARB would never give a special permit to any of these other locations. As I read this bylaw change, the ARB will not be giving approval in any of those locations, and it will not be giving approval in Cook's Hollow either. And that's because the way the selectmen wrote or changed the bylaw, you have to have a building permit before the environmental design review criteria are triggered. And I spoke earlier this evening with the building inspector. The types of low walls that are shown on those figures there, unless they're more than 4 feet high, and none of them are not going to require a building permit. If there's no building permit, there's no EDR, which means there's no ARB. But it does mean that there's ZBA, and I'm not going to speculate as to what the ZBA might do with this proposal or any other proposals that might come forward. But the other point I'd like to make also revolves around the use of the property. And Ms. Rowe, I think, brought up the concept of Mount Auburn Cemetery. I see a real conflict in this particular parcel. In Mount Auburn Cemetery, certainly it's a popular place for bird watchers and hikers and others, but the expectation of anyone going there is that that's a cemetery. And if there's a solemn memorial service going on there, that takes precedence, and that's what I think everyone understands when they're using that space. I'm not sure what the expectation is for Cook's Hollow. Here we have a parkland for passive recreation. If people are there enjoying that space, having a picnic, or something the like, and some type of memorial procession comes in, it seems to me it creates a very awkward situation for both parties. So I really don't think it's appropriate for the use for that purpose. And finally, the other thing that's changed over the past year, I would say is the options for where these cremains could be placed. As town meeting members, if you were here 2 years ago, you'll remember that there was a resolution regarding the medical office building site at the Sims property. That's a 2-acre parcel that town meeting had told the ARB to develop for any use allowed by zoning. Unfortunately, the selectmen involved themselves in the process, and that parcel is not getting developed for anything. It's being kept as open space under the jurisdiction of the Conservation Commission. Now, I know people are going to say, oh, but that's owned by someone else, and they'll try to raise certain objections. I would suggest to you that that is a very much better place for this purpose. For one, there is parking there at that site. There's parking along the roadway. There's parking at the existing Vista Park that is there. That site's being designed from the ground up, so there's no expectation for anyone and no history of anyone using that as open space. And it's much larger. Certainly that could be an ideal place for this type of use. And also that the zoning in the Sims district is the multi-use district. It is the only parcel in town that has that district, so you would indeed have to rezone that parcel for burying cremains there. But once you do that, it would be the only space that is affected. So I'm going to vote against this, and I hope you will too. Thank you.
Mr. Rearig? Scott Smith? Bill Berkowitz?
How many cremated remains are likely to be interred in Cook's Hollow? What its capacity would be for such remains, and for about how long, how many cremated
remains are they projecting?
How many cremated remains can be interred in Cook's Hollow, and for how long would this relieve the pressure on cemetery space in Arlington?
Adam? You? Yep.
Michelle Hasser Cemetery.
Michelle,
well,
bring that mic right down to him and reintroduce yourself.
I'm sorry, too short.
Yeah.
Michelle Hasser Cemetery Commission. What the conceptual design back there talks about as an idea is perhaps a wall that has 150 niches in it. You could do 75 front and back, let's say. You can also do niches right down the side. Each niche could hold 2 cremains in it, so that would actually be enough for 300 people in one wall. Unless we are able to pursue this further, again, that's just an estimate. It's just a concept for one of those lower walls. One of the reasons why we're asking for this zoning change is just to be given the opportunity to try to further investigate this project only at Cook's Hollow and not at any other space, because it's senseless to put more money into it if we are not going to be able to do anything with it.
Is 300 remains then the capacity?
It's not the capacity. It would not be the full capacity, but I'm just giving an estimate for one of the walls, like way up in the back.
What would be the capacity?
I don't know what the exact capacity would be.
Suppose there were 300 remains there, for about how long do you see that as meeting the needs of Arlington?
Well, that's just one. That would just be one of the small walls in the back that you're talking about. Not to be insensitive, it depends upon how fast they would have to get used up. In the last 3 years, we have had the burials or interments of almost 800 residents just in 3 years. In the last 3 years, we have sold over 200 new spaces. So I can't really give an exact number, because every year it fluctuates.
Is it accurate to say that this would satisfy the need for, let's say, 3 years?
I would expect to get more out of that,
Mm-hmm.
actually. I really would expect to get more out of that. One of the things that the cemetery is going to do is there is a part in the very last section that we have to use that is very wet. And we cannot use it for burials. We don't feel comfortable using it for that. And that is where we will be making a green cemetery for cremains to have something that is at least reusable. And that's what green cemeteries are about, is having an area that is reusable. Cremains only, it wouldn't do anything with full body interments.
Thanks very much.
Yep, thank you.
Ms. Scott, did you wish to get on the list? You were next if you wanted to. Okay.
Information or confusion in the first two speakers had to do with the fact, as I listened to the first gentleman who talked, whose name I'm sorry I forgot to write down, talked about the start of a process. When Mr. Schlickman got up, he spoke as though this was some great conspiracy that was happening. I have great faith in our elected officials and our appointed officials who have spent months and months and months coming to this conclusion. I don't disregard what Mr. Schlickman said, but I don't look at this as a conspiracy because we all choose what interests us. And if cemeteries interested me, I would go to the meetings. I have other things that interest me, as obviously Mr. Schlickman does too. I appreciate the fact that our appointed boards who have come to this decision have made a huge effort. And the point that they made in the beginning is this is the start of a process. It is not the end of a process. And as Mr. Schlickman listed all the places that could be turned into cemeteries in the blink of an eye, one of them is Mount Gilboa, of which my property abuts. And I know that should that even be a vague idea, I will hear about it. Our officials notify us. I am voting for this amendment because I have faith in our elected officials, and I have a huge amount of faith and support in our appointed people who have come to this decision not easily, but as a viable point for people in Arlington. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Cook?
Calvin Koch, Precinct 16. I agree with Mr. Kaplan that this is really a Band-Aid, not a long-term solution. And after they gobble up this park, what will be next and when does it stop? So I'm voting no.
Mr. Jameson?
Oops. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Gordon Jameson, Precinct 12. First off, I admire all the hard work of the different commissions and the Board of Selectmen and people have put into this. And my mother resides in the ground behind a church, not like this would be, which is in the wall in one of these types of things. And when I do get a chance to visit her, I find it a peaceful and place to reflect on my mother's life. But primarily I rose because I have a whole bunch of questions, which maybe some of you have. We haven't heard anything about state statutes in regards to cemeteries. I assume there's a state statute that requires that we provide space for people who wish to be buried in the town or under the town's auspices. Is that correct?
Ms. Rice, do you know the answer to that?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Juliana Rice, Town Council. I'm not familiar with any state statute that requires that a cemetery be provided in every municipality. Michelle says yes, there is.
Perhaps the Cemetery Commission representative could tell us some more?
There is a law underneath, if you were to look up under the cemetery laws, and actually Mr. Fuller, if he's here, was kind enough to print that on the Arlington list this weekend, that does state that towns are legally obligated to provide for the burial of its citizens.
Any and all?
Any and all. We take anybody
Okay.
anyways. We're good.
Oh, so we let anyone come that wishes
Oh,
to
no,
be-
no, I mean in Arlington.
Okay.
Yes,
Citizens.
sorry.
Okay.
Yes, Arlington's townspeople.
And I understand that from the discussion, someone can correct me if I'm wrong, that if we pass this bylaw amendment, that this is unlimited and we don't have any more case by case except through the review of the different commissions. Is that correct?
Mr. Kerr?
Mike Kerr, Redevelopment Board. I'm not exactly sure what you mean by
So
unlimited.
we
If
pass
you-
this and we do Cook's Hollow.
Yep.
And we run out of space Cook's Hollow, and Windows on the Mystic is decided to be perhaps the next one. That would not come back to us unless there was money required. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I assume that you took this approach versus just going after Cook's Hollow because that would be spot zoning?
Yes.
Number 5.
But just to be clear,
yes?
on one point where you did say it's unlimited, the parcels that I
Yeah,
showed.
unlimited within the ones that are
The
applied.
6 that we had showed.
Within the ones relevant to the amendment.
Correct, subject to all of those reviews.
Okay, and alternatives have been obliquely addressed this evening. There are no adjacent buildings that we could apply eminent domain to next to the cemetery and buy.
Well, the one thing I will say before Michelle gets up, because she can tell you about the plans, but realize about, as far as when cemetery use is required, et cetera, there might be a requirement for change of zoning. It might require, quite a few other things. So, and it would only be cemetery use.
But, and there's no other town-owned land adjacent to the cemetery.
I don't believe so.
Okay, the answer was negative in that. And when someone comes to the cemetery commission, perhaps the cemetery commission representative should stand up.
No, I get to take who gets to stand
yes,
up.
Mr. Moderator.
You address the
Excuse me,
questions
Mr.
to me.
Moderator. I said perhaps. I didn't say definitely. If I or a member of my family or someone other's family were to come to you inquiring about this, is it standard procedure to provide them with alternatives beyond Arlington?
No, we don't have anything to provide beyond Arlington. If people are, sometimes people come to us, actually not sometimes, quite often, every week, looking to buy pre-need that we have to turn away. And our secretary is very good about suggesting elsewhere where they might be able to go, but they
People
can't.
requesting what? I'm sorry, I didn't catch that.
They inquire about buying pre-need burial spaces, which we
Yes.
cannot do anymore. And
Okay,
we
so-
stopped doing long before me. I was in elementary school
So
when they
you
stopped doing
allocate
that.
spaces based upon immediate need.
Yes, immediate need.
You gotta be
yes.
deceased to get a space.
Unfortunate immediate need. Okay.
Yes. Yes.
And so I guess one suggestion I would have is that you do some homework and find people, because they may find it more cost effective, even though the person would not be interred in Arlington, to find other places like the town investigated in Lexington or Bedford or Wakefield, as we heard, and they may choose that of their own volition.
If they would like to, yes, they can. We've, before I came on the commission 10 years ago, I know that when Reed's Brook was being developed, that the cemetery came up then. And I'm not exactly sure 100% why that was rejected, but it was. I don't want to take up your time.
Sometimes, in my experience of being in town for 10 years, and I think this is my 9th year on the meeting, the town does things and doesn't wish to lose income. I hate to be so blunt about it.
Yeah.
But maybe there's a time where we maybe need to think in this situation where we're between a rock and a hard space, that we need to share the wealth in this unfortunate circumstances and allow people provide people with options beyond here and let them make the choice. It's their choice. It's their loved one that's being dealt with. If the moderator may continue to have you stand, in the current cemetery, are dogs allowed?
Well, currently, On our signs, we ask for people not to have their dogs in the cemetery. However, that cannot legally be enforced right now. And if people do come through the cemetery, we just hope that they would keep them leashed and just walk on the roads and not on the grass or the spaces.
Okay, and so what I've heard is there's no land immediately available without us condemning something adjacent to the current cemetery. I believe I've heard indirectly that this location was chosen because it's the most, of the potential spaces that we own, it has the closest proximity to the existing cemetery. Now, those are all good reasons for this to potentially be a good project and a good way to go forward. But the underlying thing that I commonly hear us talk about when we debate things that require money is all the ways we can do this on the cheap, with all due respect, with the grants and everything in an existing place. And my question is, the first place that I would have suggested for this, if we were going to use this type of space, is Windows on the Mystic, which whenever I've driven by there, and I don't live on that side of town, but I do drive by several times each season, is a poorly used park, fairly unkept last time I looked, and it has, pardon? And it has a wonderful outlook onto the Mystic Lakes, which is an imminent part of Arlington, and perhaps more space than we're talking about here, and would provide a secluded space for people versus the high thoroughfare operation that we're talking about here, which is it's a path that's multi-use. So I'm disappointed that my interpretation is that some of the reason we've pursued this location is because we don't want to put out any cash to do this right. So I'll go back to my first point. I know there's been a huge amount of work on this. I'll leave it up to your own decisions. Thank you.
Okay, we'll take Mr. Jones, then we'll take a break.
Alan Jones, Precinct 14. I think twice in 2 nights is a record for me. And I'm only a newcomer to Arlington. I've been here 38 years. But I guess in my practical way, I'm looking at this sort of pragmatically. I'm a little less concerned with maybe the process than Mr. Schlickman is. And we have 2 problems. One is there is a lack of burial space. We know that. And our open spaces are often neglected, whether it's through lack of funding or lack of respect for them. How many spaces roughly do we have left in Mount Pleasant, Mr. Moderator?
Michelle? Yeah, either mic.
Michelle Hasser Cemetery. Exactly how many spaces?
Roughly.
I did not bring that. I did not bring that number with me. I'm sorry. It's definitely it's filling in very quickly. It's less than 5. I don't.
5?
5 years. I'm
5
sorry,
years.
not 5 spaces. Sorry about that.
Okay. And I'm just curious, of the people here, again, I'm a newcomer, of the people here, how many would like to be buried in their hometown or their adopted town? Well, that's not too bad. I guess there'll be room for you if you hurry. Don't wait too long.
Jim's going to get to do something quick.
I guess I don't have, and I'm speaking very much personally, I don't have a problem being in a cemetery. If other people's families were buried in Cook's Hollow, I would still find it a nice place. If a family member of mine passed away, I would certainly consider it to be a nice place to have them buried because I could go and visit periodically. It's a nice, pleasant place. Certainly places like Mount Auburn and Père Lachaise and even the old burying ground are sort of nice, contemplative places. And I guess, again, speaking for myself, I wouldn't mind Cook's Hollow being that way. And frankly, if this was a possibility, my neighbors will probably hate me for this, but I wouldn't mind the Crusher lot next to my house being used in the same way. There's a lot of parking up by Gray Street. for sessions. I find I can't think of a better way to preserve open space. I love open space. I'm very much for preserving it. And again, it tends to fall into neglect partly for financial reasons and partly because of lack of respect. And I think even more than the monetary reasons, if people know that this is a burying ground of some sort, I think places would be treated with more respect, and maybe the Ottoson kids wouldn't be throwing beer cans all the time for the dog walkers to clean up. I don't know. I just find it a very good way to respect and preserve open space. So I'll be voting in favor of this article, and I hope you'll join me in doing that. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, we'll take a quick 10-minute break, then we'll resume. Go. says he had his name up. I'm going to stick him up here.
John,
Yeah.
this would be a good opportunity for you to assert your authority and say, do you want to move the question?
Oh.
I mean, look at that list.
I'll ask if there's any.
I think you could reach out and see if somebody wants to move the question, then it's up to the town meeting.
Please come to order. Yep. No, go ahead. Chapdelaine going to give us a 2-second introduction.
Thanks. Very quickly, Adam Chapdelaine, Town Manager. One of my first tasks in becoming Town Manager was replacing myself as Deputy Town Manager. So we have made an appointment of Andrew Flanagan, who's currently working for the City of Newburyport, and though he hasn't officially started yet, he did come to town meeting tonight, so I just want to introduce to the town meeting Andrew Flanagan. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Lyman Judd, Precinct 9. Okay. I'll speak directly into the microphone then. I think we're losing sight of what the basic problem is. That is, lack of room for burial or any such thing. So that people who wish to be buried in Arlington, even if they're cremated, don't have too much choice. Oak Grove Cemetery still has lots and lots of room in West Medford. However, I would wonder if, of all the people that are here, how many of you have ever been to the National Cemetery on Cape Cod at Bourne? Anyone? Okay. Now, you have probably seen the columbariums that they have there. Now, they're planting people all the time. They have full-time crews because there are so many veterans in Massachusetts, amongst other places. However, I would suggest that unless it has already been studied, and I don't know if it has, that we either, I will volunteer to chase it down, but the columbariums that they have are very tasteful looking. They can hold very large numbers, and it might be worthwhile to investigate as to how much they cost, who made them. Of course, if it was the federal government that bought them, they probably didn't get the lowest price. But these, I believe, could easily be installed in various areas of the Mount Pleasant Cemetery. And I think, as I say, I can work with the local veterans agent who has more familiarity than I, but I would say that this is maybe a possible compromise that will maybe relieve some of the bad feelings on either side of the issue. By the way, I was born at Sims Hospital, 1940, and 5 of my ancestors are buried at Mount Pleasant, and there's room for 3 more, one of whom will be me. Whether I'll be in one piece or not, I don't know, because I think I'm finally going to go to Harvard, as a cadaver, that is. So, I figure I might maybe they'll find something that might help medical science. Then again, maybe not. But that's the one thing that people should remember. If you bury organs, they're not used to anyone else. Organ donation is a good thing to do if you can. However, Mr. Moderator, would it be proper to offer a substitute motion to form a commission or an investigative body to see what can be done as far as columbarium, or would you rather just let it float for the time being? As I say, I'll find out whatever information I can.
I would think that forming a commission would be outside the scope of the article.
Well, that's
But
what I figured.
you're free to go to the cemetery commission meetings and volunteer your time.
Absolutely. Well, as I say, the Massachusetts National Cemetery at Bourne, which is at the entrance to Camp Edwards, it's off Route 28, is really a nice place to go to. They have probably the greenest grass on Cape Cod, amongst
Bring
other
it back
things.
within the article.
But at any rate, I think possibly this might be a solution. Therefore, if we take no action on this article, I can possibly offer this alternative, which I hope would satisfy everyone, because columbariums can take a lot of remains.
Thank you.
Oh, by the way, sir, I may hold this microphone in a strange way, but I am a recovering alcoholic, and I last had a drink in 1985. So the wisecrack
Congratulations.
was not appreciated.
Sorry about that. Congratulations. This gentleman over here? Yes, sir. Nope, nope. Farther back. You.
It's my 24th birthday, and it's nice to be arguing with him again. So I'd like to be able to bury my parents in Arlington, and I'd like to not have to do that soon. So I agree that like refocusing the conversation on the urgent space needs is important. As a side note, if this article if we don't pass this article, go Google what they did in the cemetery in the Jewish quarter of Prague. It was just pile dirt and get more bodies. That might be the only solution we have available to us. It seems, though, that the opponents of this article object primarily to the norms regarding the notice of public meetings. It seems to me that we're a legislative body that can promulgate whatever norms we want about notice related to public meetings. And I'd be happy to sign, Mr. Schlickman's contribution to the warrant next year to that effect. But it seems to me that if truly our sole concern is people won't get to talk, get up and talk at meetings about this, that's the solution, not sitting here and wondering whether or not action that ultimately we're going to have to take in one form or another ought to be taken. So I think it is possibly worth considering that the notice requirements, as part of the objection, might be the thing that is more properly addressed, sort of outside of the scope of this. The question I have is, there was some discussion of grant money tied to this, and I wonder how much of the format of the article being proposed that is so contentious was related to the availability of monies.
Mr. Care?
Well, the formation of the article is actually in the bailiwick of the selectmen. However, as far as the vote is concerned, I can tell you that from my perspective, it was a big piece of my particular vote for this article, and I think the board's as well, as I mentioned in the item. If this is cemetery commission and it's put over to the cemetery commission as people are talking about, no grant money.
All right. So it seems to me that any transfer of the land in the way that Mr. Schlickman and others suggest would at least be at cross purposes to the revenue generating portion of what's being discussed. Is
I
that
don't
correct,
believe we're
Mr.
transferring any land.
No, I
We're
think
just
what he's
changing
saying
the
is
zoning
Right.
bylaws.
So Mr. Schlickman said, would prefer that the town receive notice, through the warrant in order to transfer land. But it seems to me that comes at some significant financial cost, and I wondered if we could have a little bit more information about that.
I'm not sure the exact cost of it, and I think that's one of the problems with the conceptual design versus the other. But I can tell you that I think the belief is that we don't plan on coming for money with respect to the project. Whereas if it's made into cemetery land, the seed money that the Cemetery Commission has, number one, it'll be a cemetery. It won't be a park anymore. It won't be under the Conservation Commission. It'll be a cemetery. And the other thing is that it will have to come back here in order to create a cemetery.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you. Mr. McCabe? Harry?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I was afraid you had forgotten me. However you vote on this issue, it's important that you vote with accurate information. A previous speaker referenced the Mount Gilboa area. I live on Mount Gilboa. I'm a member of the Mount Gilboa Improvement Association, former officer. It's been in existence for more than 50 years, almost as old as I am. And to the best of my knowledge, there has been no comment to the contrary with regard to this article. So I don't know what the intention of one of the previous speakers was, whether he was suggesting that there was objection in the neighborhood. There may very well be, but I don't have any knowledge of it. The association is a very active organization, and we communicate regularly. The other issue is the same speaker suggested, I think, that this article would transfer this land, this Conservation Commission land, to the Cemetery Commission. Mr. Moderator, I have read the warrant article a number of times. I have read the proposed vote, and to the best of my knowledge, I see nothing in there that would transfer the responsibilities for these lands to anybody.
That's the way I read it.
And if the town council is here, maybe she could advise us. Maybe there's something exotic going on here, sub rosa the law, that I don't understand, but I doubt that.
Straightforward.
Anyways, I would like the meeting to be very clear on that. I'm not suggesting how you should vote. I will vote my own conscience, but I don't see anything in the proposed vote that would anyway diminish the authority of the Conservation Commission. The approval of the Cemetery Commission, the Conservation Commission, and to the extent land that has historic or archaeological significance, the Historic Commission is required. And as I read it, Mr. Moderator, you may read this differently. It says that all 2 or 3 of these commissions have to agree. If anyone disagrees, then, as I read it, nothing happens. And Mr. Moderator, you're an attorney. You might clarify that for us in the absence of the town council.
Oh, she's back.
Thank you very much. She's back, okay.
There's nothing here transferring land, or there's nothing hidden in here that somehow gives it away from the Conservation Commission or takes away their power. No, that's correct. It's what I just said. That good, Harry? I guess so. Mark McCabe was sitting back there. Is he still in the room? Nope. Andrew Fisher? Andy?
Andrew Fisher, Precinct 6. I just want to say I'm very uneasy, mainly because of the fact that this, from what I understand, is a vote that applies to those several different open spaces. My brother lives on Alpine Terrace, and his backyard is Mount Gilboa. And to me, it's not an issue of whether he objects or not. It's that we're giving approval to start something that will have a life of its own once it gets started. I did have one question, just sheer curiosity. There was a low wall, what did they call it, a wall concept, and I'm curious why that can't be placed in in the cemetery proper, either along the road or it seems to me there's quite a bit of area right around the chapel where the bare root trees are stored. So that's just a question that I had. Those walls don't take up much room, it seems.
Michelle Hasser, Cemetery. Yes, you're correct. There is some space around the chapel, which we are leaving open right now for the hoped-for renovation of the chapel, so that nothing is being disturbed out and around there right now. To put something like that out there, it wouldn't give enough room for what needs to be done at the chapel, so that's something that we plan on addressing further on down the road. We just can't do that right now. I would also just like to point out something that many people probably do not realize about the cemetery is that when you go down there and you think you are looking at open space, that, oh, why aren't they using this? Please keep in mind that the cemetery has a very antiquated, very complex water system that goes underneath, number one. Number two, there are MWRA pipes that go through the cemetery as well, so we cannot use those spaces. There are utility lines that go underground that we cannot use certain spaces. And also there are certain areas that, due to the brook, are very inappropriate and unusable too. So some of the spaces that you might be seeing and you're going down there going, why don't they put this here, or why don't they do this here, what have you, there's very good reason why. And I don't think many people understand that or realize that. So.
Okay. Thank you. I would just say I hate like crazy to vote against such committees. After all the work, you know a lot more about it than I do, but you'd increase your chances a lot if you were to make this vote specific to Cooks Hollow. Thank you.
Unfortunately, the language legally can't be done that way. It's called illegal zone spotting, and that's why it doesn't specifically say Cooks Hollow, but thank you for bringing that up. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Wagner? Where'd he go? Oh, Carl Wagner.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Carl Wagner, Precinct 11. I move to terminate debate on the article and all associated matters.
Okay. We have a motion to terminate debate on the article and all matters. It's been seconded. All in favor, please say yes. Yes. All opposed, say no. No. In my opinion, it's a two-thirds vote. Debate is terminated. We have now before us the recommended vote of the Arlington ARB is printed in their report. All in favor, please say yes. Yes. Opposed, say no. No. My opinion is a negative vote. Okay, more than 5 people have arisen. Yes, it is. More than 5 people has arisen. We're going to have a standing vote. Mr. Schlickman, if you would count, Mr. O'Connor, Mr. Tremblay, and Mr. McCabe. All in favor of the article, please rise. Oh, Diane's going to count. Up front. 8. 8 in favor up front, Mr. Schlickman. 11 in favor to my left, Mr. O'Connor. 25, 25, left center. Right center, Mr. Tremblay. 17. Mr. McCabe on the right. 14, 1-4. All opposed, please rise. Ms. Mahan? 2. Mr. Schlickman? 14. 26. Mr. Tremblay? 23. Mr. McCabe? 30. It counts 75 in the positive, 95 in the negative. It is defeated. Hey, none of that. Okay. Mr. Oh God, I forget it. Tossi, we're going to take 3 off the table for a second.
I'd like to take Article 3 off the table for one quick report. Thank you.
Okay, we have a report of a committee. All in favor? Opposed? Okay. Mr. Foskett.
Charles Foskett, Precinct 8. I would just like to ask that the town meeting receive the report of Capital Planning Committee. There was a little confusion earlier in the meeting. I missed the cue there. Sorry, I said I missed the cue earlier in the meeting. Would like to report on this and ask the town meeting to consider voting on Article 41 the same night and just prior to the special town meeting, because the capital budget is contained both in the regular town meeting and in the special town meeting, but we can address that another night. I would just ask that the town meeting receive the report this evening so that you have it well in advance. Thank you.
Thank you. All in favor of receiving the report? Opposed? The report is received. Mr. Tosti, put 3 back on the...
Article 3 be placed upon the table.
All in favor? Aye. Mr. Tosti, can you take 8 off the table, please?
I get a lot of exercise with this job. I move that Article 8 be taken from the table.
Okay. 8. We now have Article 8 before us. All in favor of taking it off the table?
Have a report that we can see in hand.
This blue one.
Thank you.
Light blue. Okay. ARB, Article 8, Mr. Simmons. Okay, so we have Hayner, Fisher, Fitzgerald.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Bruce Fitzsimmons, Arlington Redevelopment Board. I'm presenting Article 8, a proposed amendment to the zoning bylaw that would allow accessory apartments and single-family residences in zoning districts R0 and R1. These are the single-family zones. An accessory apartment is a second unit that's located within a structure built as a single-family house, smaller than the primary unit, and separated from it with its own kitchen, bathroom, and 2 means of egress. By way of background, over the past several years, the Planning Department has received several requests to consider allowing accessory apartments in Arlington. Those who favor allowing accessory apartments argued that doing so would allow long-term residents to stay in their homes, even in the face of rising home ownership costs, by renting out a portion of their properties and using the rental income to make mortgage payments, pay real estate taxes and insurance premiums, and to cover the costs of maintenance and improvements. Worthy as those goals are, the Planning Department and the ARB were also concerned with the impact that allowing accessory apartments would have in Arlington, a town with a high population density, relatively small lots, and precious little open space. To see how we could allow accessory apartments and still preserve the town's important characteristics, we took a multifaceted approach. The planning department looked into how other local towns and cities have addressed the issue of accessory apartments and completed a matrix showing the results of that research. In drafting the warrant article, we borrowed from the experience of our neighboring communities when doing so made sense for Arlington. Those results have been posted on the ARB's website. In addition, an online survey of town meeting members was conducted this past winter to determine the level of interest among members in considering a warrant article of this type. Of the 119 members who responded, approximately 75% indicated they would consider allowing accessory apartments. I don't wish to overstate this point. The results indicated that you would consider it, not that you would approve it, and of course the number of respondents was approximately only half of the total membership. Nevertheless, the survey results and your comments were informative and helped guide the drafting of the article. Those survey results were also posted on the ARB's website. The ARB has discussed this topic at many board meetings, including a public information session in February of this year that was dedicated solely to this topic, as well as at the ARB's annual public hearing on proposed zoning bylaw amendments held this past March. At these meetings, we listened to arguments both in support of and in opposition to the concept of accessory apartments. At times, those arguments were quite passionate. These meetings helped the ARB and the planning department to understand with greater clarity the issues pertaining to accessory apartments that most concerned our citizens. From this process, the ARB concluded that there was interest in an article that would allow accessory apartments, provided that there were sufficient controls to preserve the residential character of Arlington's neighborhoods. The recurring themes in the public response were that accessory apartments must be significantly smaller and subordinate to the main dwelling unit. The accessory apartment must be contained within the main dwelling unit. Either the main apartment or the accessory apartment must be owner-occupied. There must be adequate on-site parking for both the main dwelling and the accessory apartment. The accessory apartment should be allowed only by special permit, and the accessory apartment and the main dwelling unit must meet all requirements of the zoning bylaw in force at the time of filing the special permit application. Turning to the warrant article itself, I submit that we have arrived at the right balance. The article provides that accessory apartments will only be allowed by special permit in the R0 and R1 districts, and then only in single-family dwellings that meet all the requirements of both the zoning bylaw and the town's bylaw, in effect, as of the time of filing the special permit application. This means that in order for the application to succeed, under current requirements, a property in the R0 zoning district must contain at least 9,000 square feet with frontage of at least 75 feet, with no more than 35% of a lot covered by improvements, with a front yard setback of 25 feet from the front street, side yard setbacks of 10 feet, and a rear yard setback of 20 feet, with height not in excess of 35 feet or 2.5 stories, and with open space on the lot equal to at least 30% of the gross floor area. In an R1 zoning district, the minimum lot size is 6,000 square feet, and the minimum frontage is 60 feet, all other dimensional requirements being the same as in the R0 district. We believe that these requirements with respect to lot size will help protect against an unreasonable increase in density if accessory apartments were allowed. The article further provides that there shall be not more than one accessory apartment on a lot, and that the accessory apartment must be contained within the existing dwelling. This provision would prohibit an accessory apartment from being situated in an accessory building, such as a garage or a carriage house, and is intended to preserve the architectural integrity of the existing structure and the residential character of the neighborhood in which it is situated. We were particularly concerned with the issue of parking. We considered whether a parking space for an accessory apartment might be required in all cases, or whether it could be waived on a case-by-case basis, depending on various factors such as proximity to public transportation, proximity to alternative parking areas, whether or not the prospective resident of the accessory apartment owned a vehicle, or whether the owner of the existing dwelling owned more than one car. In the end, we concluded that a firm requirement of 3 spaces, 2 for the main dwelling and 1 for the accessory apartment, would be the best way to address concerns that accessory apartments would lead to greater street congestion due to either permitted overnight parking or illegal overnight parking. Perhaps the key component of the article is that the accessory apartment must be clearly accessory to the main dwelling. The main way to accomplish this goal is to require that the accessory apartment be significantly subordinate in size to the main dwelling unit. Accordingly, the article provides that the gross floor area of the accessory apartment cannot be greater than 1/3 the gross floor area of the entire dwelling, and in no event greater than 700 square feet in size. At this point, I understand we have some volunteers who have said that they would be willing to rise and find the spots that are on the floor. Laura Wiener, Joey Glushko, Mr. O'Connor, and we have, I'm sorry, my eyes aren't that good. That's approximately 700 square feet. So you can get a feel for what type of space we're talking about. Pardon me? Oh, if you want to raise your hand just so it's clear who you are, where you're standing. Great, thank you. By imposing this restriction, the article attempts to clearly distinguish the case of an accessory apartment in a single-family dwelling from a case of 2 rental apartments in a 2-family residential dwelling. Due to the subordinate size requirement, accessory apartments will most likely be occupied by a single person or at most 2 people. Families and larger groups of tenants would find an accessory apartment too small. In effect, by restricting the size of accessory apartments, we are creating a separate class or market for accessory apartments that is distinct from that of rental apartments generally, whether they be in 2 or 3 family dwellings or multi-unit apartment buildings. Finally, the article would require that at least one of the units be owner-occupied. By doing so, the article attempts to preserve the residential character of a neighborhood by making the accessory apartment option only available to someone who currently owns a qualifying property and wishes to continue to live in one of the units. As I mentioned earlier in these remarks, we've heard and read a great deal of public comment on this article, some of which has been strongly critical of the concept. Opponents have stated that this article, if passed, would result in the elimination of single-family zoning or destroy the character of Arlington's residential neighborhoods. I would submit that this vastly overstates the case. If you refer back to the terms of the article itself, you will see that there are protections built into the article to preserve single-family residential districts while carving out an exception for accessory apartments. I would also submit to you that the character of our neighborhoods is defined not solely by the types of buildings we allow to be situated there, but also by the people who live in them. Allowing accessory apartments will allow long-term residents to continue to live in their homes and in their neighborhoods. Allowing accessory apartments would also provide opportunity for multi-generational families, including adult children who may not have the resources to find adequate housing in town, to live together, pooling resources, providing child care and elder care to each other under one roof, but with a greater degree of privacy. In conclusion, I would ask that the town meeting carefully review this article's protections for our neighborhoods and single-family districts and find, as I hope you will, that it strikes the right balance between those values and the goals of allowing long-term homeowners to continue to reside in their homes. Thank you.
Mr. John.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. John Worden, Precinct 8. Well, despite what the distinguished speaker before me just said, I'm still of the opinion that a more straightforward form of this article would be to see if the town will vote to abolish the single-family districts in the town. The ARB's proposed bylaw contains, despite what you've heard, no safeguards or limitations except that the ZBA must give a special permit. A review of past history indicates that the ZBA grants just about every special permit that is requested. If a homeowner wants extra income, he or she should sell his single-family house and buy a two-family house, of which, as you know, there are many in Arlington, both in the R2 districts and scattered throughout the R1 districts. As far as the elderly are concerned, or us long-term homeowners, the proposal is a permanent solution to a temporary problem. If the ARB were sincere about just helping the elderly, they would make the accessory use end when the elderly person dies or vacates the home, which all of us are going to do eventually. As for family members, a situation just described, extra bathrooms can be added without any permits except to follow the plumbing code. And family members really should be able to share a kitchen, and we have had plenty of experience in our own family of doing that, and we didn't have a problem. Preserving the character of the existing single-family neighborhoods is said to be a concern, but there are essentially no safeguards in their proposed bylaw. My amendment seeks to remedy at least some of the shortfalls, and I move that the amendment, and I've already handed a copy to the moderator, be I move that amendment. I don't know if you can read that. Thank you. Will I read the amendment, Mr. Moderator, or can everyone see it? It was on their chairs Monday night. I'm glad to read it if anybody. Okay.
I think you just explained it, sir.
The reading of it is waived?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. If you're as elderly as I and your eyesight as bad as mine, you couldn't see that screen, but I'm glad you folks are better situated. Okay. The proposal that an accessory apartment must be within the home as it exists at the time of the application leaves a hole large enough to drive a house through, or at least an accessory apartment. It's an open invitation for the owner or developer to build whatever addition he wants, finishing everything but the kitchen, and then applying for the permit. My first amendment sets January 1st, 2012 as the basic condition into which the new apartment must be inserted, thereby guarding against this sort of abuse. And their proposal, if you recall, said it must fit the dimension, it must be within the building as it exists when you apply for the permit. So obviously, you make the building the way you want it, then you apply for the permit. And my amendment would try to fix that. The proposal is said to be needed for elderly homeowners who need help and or income, but don't want to leave their homes and for some reason don't want to take in a boarder. So my second and third amendments go exactly to this point. Only the elderly or disabled owner can get such a permit, and when he or she no longer owns the house, the permit expires unless the property is sold to another elderly or disabled person. Otherwise, as I mentioned before, you have a permanent solution to a temporary problem. My amendment makes the solution fit the perceived need. My fourth amendment addresses the situation where, say, you want to provide for your mother-in-law, but you or she, or maybe both of you, need some level of separation. Again, when the situation ends, the permit would end. These amendments are, I believe, essential to create at least some safeguards for accessory apartments. Without them, the proposed bylaw is completely intolerable. There is, I think, an economic argument against accessory apartments. If every single-family home can be converted essentially into a two-family simply by getting a special permit, the value of single-family homes is going to decrease in view of the additional population density, congestion, automobile parking, traffic, etc. The value of existing two-family homes would also decrease, as so many more would be on the market, that it would be found to have a negative effect upon existing stock. Does anyone really want to gamble with the value of his or her most valuable asset, their home, just so someone else can earn a few extra dollars in rent? The so-called community interest in accessory apartments is a myth. A former member of the redevelopment board told me that during his time in office, he knew of only a single person, a person said to already have an illegal accessory apartment in her house, raising the issue. At the official public hearing on March 12th, contrary to what the gentleman said, which was advertised 2 times in the Advocate, it states, as it states in the report, not one person spoke in favor of this proposal, and the 4 people who did speak on the subject were against it. So much for public input. This article is really about increasing the number of apartments in Arlington. Do we need more apartments here? We already have some 8,000 rental units in town, 41% of all units, according to the statistics which I found. This is 3% more than the state average. So we are really, as a community, doing our part to provide rental properties to those who wish to live here. Even as we speak, this number is being increased. 120 units are being under construction in the biggest plywood ranch you ever saw down where Brigham's used to be. Another, the long-delayed Sims Hospital project, which the selectmen promised would contain medical uses and a limited residential element, is going to have something like 170 units. That's about 300 units in the immediate or near future. In my opinion, we need more apartments about as much as we need more banks. How many more apartments are we talking about, potentially, if the proposal were to be approved without my amendments? According to figures obtained from a source believed to be reliable, there are 4,896 single-family houses in the R0 and R1 districts that are on lots that are at or over the minimum lot size for those districts. Just think about the impact on our town of nearly 5,000 more housing units. The further densification of one of the most densely populated communities in the state, the 5,000 more cars, even if they got their own parking places, the additional schools and teachers for children requiring public education. So please vote for my amendment in order to create at least some safeguards if this should go through, but please vote no on the entire package. And while I'm up here, I do want to thank Mr. LaBelle for providing these buttons, which has already been done by a couple of people. And I noticed that mine this year says at the bottom, 25 years service, 25 plus years service. This is my 43rd year in the town meeting, and thank you. I hope I have a few more. But in my view, this proposal under Article 8 for accessory apartments is one of the worst planning ideas to come before this meeting in all my time here. Thank you.
Mrs. Warden?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Patricia Warden, Precinct 8. I move to amend the recommended vote of the Arlington Redevelopment Board by adding to section 11.09B7 the following words. The other unit must be rented at no more than an affordable price as defined in Article 11, section 11.08. Can I have a second? Thank you. Warrant Article 8 is disappointing for its shortcomings regarding affordable housing in the context of overall housing policy of the town. That is, if there is any remaining housing policy in the town other than to enrich developers. We are fortunate to have the Redevelopment Board, the Planning Department, the Building Department, and the Zoning Board of Appeals, who have hardworking individuals and honorable men, not too many women, but Warrant Article 8 is an indicator that something has gone off the tracks, and we in town meeting can help our town to get back on track. The Redevelopment Board meetings on Article 8 never discussed possible unintended consequences or long-term effects on the town, nor how abuses would be dealt with, except that they claim that the town will suddenly become very good at dealing with abuses and code violations in multi-unit homes if we just allow this article creating potentially almost 5,000 additional units. Well, I think they should pull their socks up in dealing with violations in existing accessory structures and rooming houses before asking us to create lots more of them. When asked whether accessory apartments, if allowed, would be at affordable rentals, the Redevelopment Board and the Director of Fair and Affordable Housing said no. This despite the fact that the only pressing housing need in town is for affordable housing. We have to sometimes provide living space in our homes for elderly, disabled, family members, whatever. My sister and her children lived with us while she was sorting things out from a messy divorce. After their MRT graduation, my son and his fiancée lived with us for 5 years until they got married. Our house has chaperones, of course. If only 10 accessory apartments housed tenants with a child, then the cost to educate these children will be at least $1.5 million. But we could have potentially hundreds of or thousands of accessory apartments, not just 10. With astronomical costs of education and building new schools, landlords cannot discriminate against children. Any changes that we might do to accommodate temporary residents in our home can be done by right under current zoning, including new bathrooms, additional entrances, room divisions, a spot for a microwave oven. Only a full-blown kitchen would require Article 8. The greatest danger of Article 8 is the lack of a requirement that an accessory apartment be contained within the gross floor area of the dwelling, as it existed at a defined recent date, such as January the 1st, 2012. Article 8 allows that the gross floor area can be expanded at any time right up to the date of application for the permit. So, developers will simply make a list of the many thousands of single houses in R1 and R0 districts that they want to expand or to construct an accessory apartment rental unit. Immediately, any of these houses comes on the market. When a neighbor dies or moves away, developers and real estate speculators will bid and buy them for expansion to 2 units. The Zoning Board of Appeals has already allowed many humongous expansions. Up and down our streets, Article 8 will cause expansion or heavy tear-down construction and conversion to 2-unit mega mansions with little yard space or trees remaining. After conversion of the single-family house to 2 units, then accessory apartment designation will be acquired for the smaller of the units. In promoting Article 8, the Redevelopment Board is neglecting its statutory duties, including provision of adequate open space and prevention of the overcrowding of land. I'm a charter member of the town's Affordable Housing Task Force. At several times during the last 10 years, the Director of Fair and Affordable Housing asked us to pursue accessory apartments, we decided each time that this change was not one that the town should pursue. I have been given to understand that the chief advocate of accessory apartments was a town official with an illegal apartment at home. That official wanted the illegal apartment legalized. A true story to leave you with is as follows. Last year, 3 large buildings have been constructed on a new road called Summerhill Circle off the end of Washington Street beside the bike path. These buildings each have 2 front entrances and several additional large entrances and exits. They appeared to be 2-family homes. They loom over the nearby houses since, from the bike path, they seem to be almost 4 stories high. I'm sure that's because of the generosity of the building department's determination of height regulations. In any event, since there appear to be 3 2-family houses giving a total of 6 residential units, I called the planning department to remind them that according to section 11.08 of Arlington zoning bylaw, in new residential developments of 6 or more units, 15% of the units must be affordable. The Director of Fair and Affordable Housing, who is also the assistant planner, told me she was unaware of any new such buildings. I found this remarkable, as I had met her several times on the bikeway walking beside these houses. Perhaps her sunglasses are darker than mine. She suggested that I should call the building department, which I did, and I was told that the buildings were 2 2-families and 1 single family. I pointed out that the building alleged to be a single family had 2 front entrances, each with a separate carport, and there were more entrances in the rear. I was again assured by the building department that it was a single family. However, at the open house, the realtor told me that the 3rd building was a single family home with an accessory apartment. When I pointed out that new accessory apartments are not allowed under Arlington zoning bylaw, she said that the house is essentially a 2-family house, which is allowed since it's an R2 district. That means, of course, that the redevelopment board and the planning department have the responsibility under our laws to require one of the units to be affordable or to require the developer to make a financial contribution toward affordable housing. Being puzzled by this matter, I examined the plans for the house at the building department. I came to the conclusion that if the 3rd house is a single family, then my name is Rob Roy. So, by claiming that the development has 5 units instead of 6, the owners have found a way around the town's right to affordable housing and also a way to avoid environmental design review, which is required when there are at least 6 units. Environmental design review could conceivably have improved the development, for example, by reducing the height below the generous interpretations of the building department, reducing the crowding of the site. Do we have a don't ask, don't tell housing policy in our town? If we cannot depend on enforcement of existing rules and regulations by the town, why should we enable creation of more opportunities for despoiling the town? A yes vote in Article A would create a malignant tumor, a virulent cancer, which would metastasize throughout our R1 and R0 districts, invasively destroying them. So, please vote for my amendment. If Article 8 somehow were to pass, we should at least get some affordability from it. However, even if you vote yes on my amendment, please vote no on the final vote on Article 8. This is because accessory apartments are not a good way to create affordable housing. There are much better ways. There are affordable housing initiatives worth many hundreds of thousands of dollars that the planners are currently ignoring. If we vote no, as we should in Article 8, the planning department might actually get back to work on projects improving the town rather than providing huge opportunities for developers and realtors' gains at the expense of the rest of us. Thank you.
Mr. Hayner, you have the floor.
Bill Hayner, Precinct 2. I rise in support of Mr. Warden's amendments. It is very, very difficult to vote against the elderly. The original motion, warrant article, has wrapped itself around that emotional aspect. Mr. Warden deals with it in a correct manner. I am also a concerned member of your school committee with the population that we have in students, the amount of schools that we have, and the potential need of more space in our schools. This article, this warrant article, as written, has the potential of just adding more and more. We are concerned now with the apartments that are being built down on Mill Street and the potential apartments that are going to be, or other dwellings that are coming up on Sims property. Please support Mr. Warden's amendments. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Fisher? Andrew? Mr. Fitzgerald? Mr. Helmuth?
Mr. Moderator, Eric Helmuth, Precinct 12. I have a number of questions regarding the legality, the potential legality of the amendments. Mr. Moderator, and it may make sense for whomever you choose to answer those to remain at this podium while I go through them.
Why don't you ask the question and I'll...
Yeah,
figure out
sure.
who's-
So my principal question on Mr. Warden's amendment is, would the restrictions to age or disability status or blood or marriage be in compliance with state housing laws regarding discrimination? Or would there be any other issues with state housing laws with those changes as proposed?
Ms. Rice, can we do that?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Juliana Rice, Town Council. Unfortunately, I haven't had the opportunity to research these issues. The thing that jumped out at me was I'm not sure exactly how you would find out if somebody was disabled or how you would prove that status. But I'm not sure that requiring it would be problematic from a discrimination point of view when you're talking about private landlords.
Thank you. Mr. Moderator, my second question is regarding the other amendment, stating that the other unit must be rented at an affordable price. Legally speaking, can we do that? Can we require that?
Ms. Rice?
I don't see a problem where you're allowing relief from zoning that wouldn't otherwise allow you to do it, placing that requirement or that condition on allowing the relief. Although a homeowner could challenge that requirement on the basis that it was an unconstitutional taking. But, you know, where they're currently not allowed to have that feature at all, I think you'd probably succeed in defending that.
Okay, thank you.
Again, I apologize, but I haven't had the opportunity to research this.
Okay. Thank you very much. Mr. Moderator, I have another question about the recommended, actually the language of the bylaw change, section B number 7, stating that the owners of the structure have to be there and can't be away for more than 12 months over 5 years. I appreciate the intent of that. My question is to enforceability. Who would enforce that? How would that be, you know, how would we do that? And I think my real question is this practical to enforce that provision, which I agree is a very important one.
Do you, Mr. Simmons, you have an answer to enforcement and practicability of enforcement? Who would be charged with that?
In the event that the owner-occupant has ceased to be a true owner-occupant, they've been away from the property for a greater period of time than the sabbatical provision that's allowed here, that could be enforced through complaint by someone with knowledge that person's no longer living there.
So a neighbor or anyone else who knows.
Correct.
So if they make that complaint, what does that process look like?
And who, to complain to who?
Yeah, thank you.
The complaint would go to the zoning enforcement officer. And at that point, unless the person were to move back in and reestablish owner occupancy, the special permit would lapse, and they would be in violation of the special permit.
Okay, thank you. And finally, Mr. Moderator, the point has been raised by opponents that, that this could result in McMansions and unwanted expansion that I doubt few people in the room, including myself, want to see wholesale. And if it pleases the moderator, or through the moderator, to sort of refresh my memory on some of the specific, if there are specific safeguards built into this that really make that difficult or more difficult for developers to take wholesale advantage of this, as has been described.
Mr. Fitzsimmons, if you could respond.
Yes, well, you're still going to have the requirements that we currently have for R0 and R1 districts. So you're still going to have the open space requirement, the setback requirements, and so on. And yes, you could build to the envelope, but you could do that now whether you have accessory apartments or not. You could take your single-family house and max it out as far as the envelope would allow. But those are the constraints on expanding the property.
And the same thing, you could knock your house down now and build something big if you wanted to. So demolition could happen now. And you could have an illegal accessory apartment or one that the kitchen isn't just going to, So I guess my question is, if this potential kind of exists now for large houses to be built within existing requirements, or someone to add an illegal accessory apartment or one that just skirts by with a disconnected stove, that's happened now, could be happening now, and this wouldn't make this any worse in your view?
I think the McMansion argument is a little bit beside the point. And I think we're in agreement on this, actually, that if you have the right under current zoning to have a bigger house, you can apply for a building permit, and in the event that that's denied, you can appeal that to the Zoning Board of Appeals, and there's a provision for allowing larger homes. So yes, you could do that now, and I think that doesn't change if this accessory apartment article were to be approved.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Fitzsimmons. Mr. Romano?
Maria Romano, Precinct 7. Guess some of you might call me a fool. I am a contractor, and I think that this is not a good article. I would vote against it for many reasons. For 32 years, I've been a residential builder, and I hold myself to a very high standard. I do not build just to build. I don't change the architectural landscape of a neighborhood, overcrowd it with structures, people, and whatnot. The article changes simply one-family houses to two-family houses. It has always been my goal to have an addition to a house look like it's always been there. Not that we just stuck a structure on the side of a house. And I have discussed this with many of my clients and said, let's look at this again. I will not do this. It affects your house, it affects the neighborhood, and it affects the architectural landscape of what we want to hold true to Arlington. I have two questions. Maybe one of the representatives can answer. You need two means of egress. And if the structure cannot be built on the first level because it does not meet the setback requirements, and it's built on the second level, say over a family room, the second means of egress is going to be, in some cases, unsightly, just because it has to be safe. Has that been addressed at all?
Mr. Fitzsimmons?
The answer to your question is that that second means of egress has to be contained within the existing structure, and there is a small carve-out in the Warren article that would allow a build-out of that second means of egress. So I think that would be a matter that would probably be before the Zoning Board of Appeals in terms of how that would look like.
All right, so that would be separate That structure would be separate from the 700 square feet of living space.
I think that that would be included within the 700 square feet of living space.
Because that does take a chunk
It
out
does-
of the living space.
It does take a chunk out of it, you're
Which
correct.
leads me to my other question. It can only be a one-bedroom apartment because there's just not enough room legally to have a two-bedroom apartment in that 700 square feet of space. Is that not correct? And is that a requirement that it remains a one-bedroom accessory unit?
We have not tried to define the, what the interior living space in the accessory apartment would be. It could be a studio. It could be...
Yeah, no, a studio or a one-bedroom, but I don't think it can go beyond that. My
If
other
that's-
question tying into that was, if I heard you correctly, you said that the owner can live in either unit. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Right, which leads me to a serious concern. If the owner now lives in the 700 square foot unit, then the big house can be rented to many people. And how do we govern that? How do we control that? I do not want, because of expenses of the senior citizen or the person who can't maintain that house by himself or herself, is now going to live in the one bedroom and rent out the bigger unit. And that does increase problems with schools and density and water usage and the whole 9 yards that comes with that. Because that means a lot more people can live in that existing structure. So I have many concerns that I think need to be addressed, and there are too many loopholes just based on Mr. Warden's amendment itself. It's becoming very convoluted, and I think we need more clarity here before we make an honest decision on this, and I'm voting no on this. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Simmons. Mr. Phillips, Walter?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Walter Phillips, Precinct 21. To me, this article is basically just a way to circumvent the procedure that we normally have for rezoning property. If you want to rezone a property, you submit a warrant article to this meeting. We discuss it, and it requires a 2/3 vote. If this amendment is passed, we'll have no say in this. There's not even a mention that neighbors need to be abutted. Abutting neighbors need to be notified. It's just if your neighbor wants to change their home from R1 to R2, they can do it with the very minimal restrictions included in this amendment. And as people have said, we have R0 and R1 neighborhoods because people want to live there. People have purchased property and own property whose value is dependent on the character of the neighborhood being R1 and R0. Now we're telling the people who live there, maybe you own that property and expect it to be R1, but now we're going to change part of it to R2, which is a very good example of what we have heard many, many times over many years as described as spot zoning. And the redevelopment board, to my knowledge, up to now, has never condoned spot zoning. But this amounts, in essence, this amounts to spot zoning. It's just taking a property in a particular zone and changing the zoning. In this case, changing it from R0 or R1 to R2. So I appreciate the amendments that have been offered by Mr. Warden and Ms. Warden, but even with those amendments, I would, which I support, of course, I would certainly vote against this amendment, and I hope that you will too.
Mr. Klein?
Klein, Precinct 10. I stand in favor of the article, but in opposition to the proposed amendments. I find the amendments somewhat short-sighted in some of the implications that they provide and do not, in the end, seek to accomplish what the goals of the original article are. If we say that these units can only be used by those who are over 65 or disabled, we are saying to people who are young, struggling families that you can keep struggling. We're saying to people who have young family who are looking to have a nanny live on site that you can't do that either. And I don't think that's fair, and I don't think that's appropriate. It also creates a situation where if you have a couple where one is 65 and one is 64, and the 65-year-old unfortunately passes away, the remaining person has to tear out their accessory apartment until they turn 65, at which point they can build it back, which again seems rather strange. The suggestion was made that if you have a single family and you're elderly and on a fixed income and you want to have a tenant, then you maybe should buy a two-family house. Typical difference in price in Arlington is about $140,000 to $170,000, which is difficult to spring. I live in a two-family house. I'm lucky enough to have one that is a two-family house still. I have a tenant. Most two-family houses in my neighborhood are condos. They're not two-family houses. They're two single houses. They just happen to be abutting. This drastically changes the character of Arlington and who can afford to live here. When a two-family house is a $500,000 investment, but a condo, if you buy the two-family and you condo it, you can sell it for $700,000 or $800,000. An accessory apartment is an attempt to come up with a way that we can create a smaller unit that helps to serve the needs of the people who are living in the house. The statement was made, there's a lot of concern apparently about having more people in Arlington, having more children in Arlington. From everyone I know who's lived here a long period of time, there used to be far more children in Arlington. Staggeringly larger numbers than used to be here. If you look at the numbers of schools we've closed over the years, I'm not sure why all of a sudden children are the detriment of the town. I have two of my own. They are my own personal detriment. That's beside the point. So on the age perspective, I'm concerned about that. I'm also concerned about limiting these accessory apartments to being accessible, being an affordable priced unit. I appreciate the problems we have in town with affordability. I have numbers of friends who have said, I will buy a house in Arlington next year when the prices are lower, and they've been saying this now for a decade. We desperately need affordable housing in town. I don't think forcing the accessory apartments to be affordable is a worthwhile endeavor, because we're essentially telling someone you can have this apartment because we know you're in trouble and you need the financial resources, but we're going to limit the financial resources you can get from this. I just don't think that's an appropriate way to go. This is not going to create a town of two-family houses. Lexington has accessory apartments. They've had them since 1982 or 1983. In 22 years, do you know how many accessory apartments they've added? They've added 60. 60 in the entire town of Lexington. And that's a town that doesn't have a big base already of two-family houses. I don't foresee this as being something where we're looking to turn every single house into a gold mine because we're going to add a little extra apartment into it. It's very small. Another point that was raised was the McMansion effect, that if we allow this, people are going to be building larger properties. This law does not apply to you if you build outside of what's allowed on your property. If you have I would ask for clarification on this, but my understanding is if you have an existing non-conforming house, which is that your house does not currently work within the zoning of the town that you are not allowed to have an accessory apartment. Is that correct? That is correct. So if you want to build a house that's bigger than the law allows, you are not allowed to have an accessory apartment. If you build a house that is as large as your lot allows, you can do that today, and it has nothing to do with the accessory apartment law. If you are unhappy with the size of houses going up around you, this is not the cause of it, and this is not the solution for it. It has to do with other parts of the zoning code. We had a beautiful house in our neighborhood that had 18,000 square foot lot. It was an amazing property. It's 3 big houses now. Could we do anything about it? No, because that's what zoning allows in this town. But accessory apartments have nothing to do with that. So what I'd like to get back to is I think that this is an opportunity to create some space for some people who are in a situation where they need the kind of availability they would have for an accessory apartment. Accessory apartments are not designed to supersede the owners. If there's a new owner for the property, they are required to basically reestablish the special permit. They have to go through back to the town. They have to get, I see shaking heads, I know that's not correct. They do have to sign an affidavit with the town saying that they are having this accessory, that they understand the rules of having an accessory apartment. If they fail to do that, they are, basically they're violating a court document. So, that's at their own risk. So I encourage you to please vote down these amendments. I don't think they do what they're supposed to do, and I do ask you to support the original warrant article. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Radosha?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Bob Radosha, Precinct 11. For those that are interested or care, the Bruins went the other way. They're going to be playing golf from here on. It's 2-1, I believe. Correct? Overtime. Anyhow, back in December, town meeting members received an online survey for our opinions on accessory apartments. My first reaction was to ask, now who's pushing for this? Where is this coming from? And why would the ARB need to survey town meeting members? I became suspicious when I did not receive a survey for any other articles. And this seemed more like a 2020 survey question. And as a result, after attending ARB meetings, hearings, and making comments and studying this on my own, I remain suspicious. I just don't understand what's really going on. Something else seems to be happening here, and I'm not convinced that this is in the best interest of the town. What's missing from the article that you have before you are the reasons that were given for bringing this up. And one of them was to increase the diversity of housing options. Just how diverse do we need to be? We are thought of as a town with a very diverse housing options, which includes senior housing, low-income housing, condos, apartment buildings, 2-family, small, medium, and larger single-family homes. The only thing we are missing is a mobile home park, which could be an option if the Sim site developer walks away. All right? Then we had, this was to encourage better utilization of existing housing stock. We are already one of the densest towns in the state, and with the exception of the city of Cambridge, we have a higher density than any of the towns listed on the last page of the handout that was sent to us. We're comparing ourselves with towns. We're 8,200 people per square foot. This per square mile. Okay, I'll get it straight. Cemetery, that's right. The cemetery thing is, there were about 2 square feet, those little things, anyhow. But we're 8,200 per square mile. Comparing ourselves to Lincoln, which is 602, Concord is 700 and something, Lexington is quite almost 1,900 per. So, we're 4 times Lexington. We keep saying, well, they did it in Lexington, they do it in these other places. They're not like us. All right, then the closest one we have is Watertown. And then after that, it's 4,700 in Waltham and 40-something in Newton. So we're not in the same category as the people that are on this list. They have more options in terms of expansion and so forth. All right. Now, one of the other reasons was to, and by the way, in terms of the density, the last time I checked with the treasurer's office, we have more vehicles registered in Arlington than we have people. And this is only going to lead to more vehicles, or at least one-on-one. So I don't think we need any more, as you all know. Now, one of the other reasons was to protect the safety of residents and the stability, property values, and character of residential neighborhoods. I don't see how that can happen. I think maybe it should have said undermine the safety of residents and utility and property values and character of residential neighborhoods. I don't see where it does anything to help it out. Then we have, most requests came from residents owning larger homes. There's a good chance that if they are in a larger home, they may already have a maid, caretaker, or a nanny headquarters somewhere in the house, and a Jack and Jill stairway to the upper level to bring them down. And all we need to do is just reactivate those houses to what they were originally. There's room to do it. And then we have some residents requesting this with like the option of renting for additional income. Well, I think it's unlikely that an older resident that is in need of additional income would have the $20,000 to $60,000 it would take to reconstruct the house to conform. And then they'd have to take out a loan to do it, and it would take several years to pay it back, and go nowhere with that, in addition to an increase in the assessment of their property. Now, if the issue is truly about income and the need to meet expenses, there are other options, such as property tax abatements, reverse mortgages, property tax deferral for elderly residents, or simply downsize and move to a more manageable house. Then we get into the conditions and requirements, no more than one on a lot. Well, that's been spoken to here already, and the fact that somebody could put the addition on today and come back 2 years later, and now we're going to put the apartment in. And then the business about the 3 off-street parking spaces. Well, we've had that happen in our neighborhood, and it's not a pretty picture. I have a picture here of what happened. Anyhow, now this is going to mean we're going to have to pave over some grass or something, remove a few trees, and perhaps a curb cut. And then the selectmen will be inundated with requests for more off-street parking. They'll spend a lot of time on that issue. And then the business of the owner being absent for more than 12 months in a 60-month period. Now, it says it both ways on the article you have before you. In the first paragraph, it states, one part says, no more than 12 months in a 60-month period. Then we have another statement that says, one absence of 12 months in a 60-month period. Now, to me, they're two different things. One says you got 12 months, which could be 2 months this year, 3 months the next year, and 4 months the next year. And then the other one says 12 months in one period. So there's a little confusion there. I'm not sure which is really so. And then, again, the enforcement issue on this. And chances are that some owners may be snowbirds and could be absent for 4 to 6 months a year, and in some cases even be residents of another state, which will allow them to benefit from the built-in caretaker on site while they rent out the main house, which was brought up. And we've been told that the authorities will need to rely on the neighbors to report infractions. I think it's unfair for our officials to expect taxpayers to do their jobs and become snitches. And that's what I see. I've received comments from neighbors and friends in R1 and R2 districts, and the consensus is they're opposed to any potential intrusions into their neighborhoods. Arlington is on the edge of losing its appeal as a desirable community, and approval of this article would push us in the direction of becoming a less desirable urban community. Just find a way to allow in-law apartments, as we've had for the purpose they were intended, as long as there are no code violations. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Motion to adjourn. Second? All in favor? Right. Any notices of reconsideration? Notices of reconsideration? Seeing none, we'll see you all Monday, and we start with Ms. Stamps first thing.